Some of y'all never been down south too much. I'm gonna tell you a little story so that you'll understand what I'm talking about. Down there.
Everyone's asking again. If you already know the Bob Joyce story, then you already know the familiar shape of it. You've seen the photographs, heard the voice comparisons, watched the church performances. You've heard people argue back and forth about whether a pastor in Arkansas could somehow be Elvis Presley, quietly living under another name. But lately, another name has started showing up beside his, with unusual frequency. Priscilla Presley. And that changes the way the whole story feels. She isn't just another celebrity swept into an internet theory. She was married to Elvis. She knew him during one of the most important stretches of his life. They had a daughter together, and even after the divorce, she stayed connected to him and later played a major role in the Presley family and estate. So when a headline suggests Priscilla has something to say about Bob Joyce, people who already know the theory sit up and pay attention. Here's the distinction worth holding on to, though, as we go through this. The claim that Priscilla Presley confirmed Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley has been spreading online through 2026, dressed up in sensational headlines and dramatic video titles. But the evidence we could actually find does not show that she ever said any such thing. That doesn't make this less interesting. If anything, it makes the real question more interesting. Why is her name back in this story right now? Where did the current claim actually come from? What's it based on? Is there a full interview somewhere, a recording, something we can point to? Or did an older comment get reinterpreted, one unsourced claim slowly turning into dozens of headlines? And why does a story like this keep pulling in people who've been following it for years? That's what we're going to dig into. This isn't a fresh introduction to the Bob Joyce theory. If you're here, you likely already know the basic case. What matters now is this new doorway into an old mystery, and right now, that doorway has Priscilla Presley's name written across it. Why her name carries so much weight? There's a simple reason Priscilla's name can shift the emotional weight of this whole story. She knew Elvis. That fact alone doesn't prove anything about Bob Joyce, but it explains exactly why the internet keeps reaching for her. Priscilla met Elvis in Germany in 1959 while he was serving in the United States Army. The relationship continued once he came home, and they married in Las Vegas on May 1st, 1967. Their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born on February 1st, 1968. The marriage eventually ended, their separation formalized in 1972, the divorce granted in October of 1973. But the relationship didn't simply vanish after that. By Priscilla's own account, and by Graceland's own history, she and Elvis stayed close right up until his death. That closeness is exactly what gives the modern rumor its emotional logic. If someone claims Bob Joyce is secretly Elvis, and then attaches Priscilla's name to that claim, the audience instantly understands why her supposed words would matter so much. A stranger can compare two faces. A fan can compare two voices. A creator can point to a photograph and draw an arrow. But an alleged statement from someone who actually lived with Elvis feels like a completely different category of evidence. The problem is, the authority of a real relationship can't authenticate an unverified quote. A person can genuinely know a celebrity and still be falsely quoted online. That's why the important question isn't, would Priscilla know if Elvis had somehow survived? The important question is, did Priscilla actually say what the internet claims she said? Those two questions sound almost identical.
You realize how young he was to leave us, And I think that was the day the whole world mourned. There was such a...
They aren't. The first is speculation. The second can actually be investigated. And once we do investigate it, this story starts to look very different from the sensational version sitting in some of these thumbnails. The documented history between Priscilla and Elvis is real. The Bob Joyce theory is real as an internet phenomenon. The current claim tying Priscilla to it is real too, as a claim in circulation. What's still missing is the one thing that would connect all of that into an actual revelation, a verifiable primary source. The claim that started the new wave. The viral version making the rounds right now is, on its face, remarkably simple. Priscilla Presley supposedly acknowledged that Bob Joyce is, in fact, Elvis Presley. Some versions push even further, framing the alleged statement as a confession, something that finally settles the mystery once and for all. That kind of language is exactly why the story keeps spreading. But dramatic wording and actual evidence are two very different things. Throughout 2026, a stream of online articles and videos has repeated versions of this allegation, one wave in the spring, another in the summer. That repetition alone can make a claim feel increasingly established, almost self-evident by sheer volume. But once you trace the material back, you run into a problem pretty quickly. These articles confirm that the allegation is circulating. What they don't provide is a credible, authenticated primary source showing that Priscilla actually said what they claim she said. That gap is really the heart of everything we're covering here. Nobody's disputing that people have made this claim. They clearly have. The question is what the claim is actually built on, and that's a very different kind of investigation. Normally, when a public figure makes a remarkable statement, there's something we can go check. A full interview, a recording, a transcript, an official post, a passage from a book, a credible report that quotes the original source directly. The more extraordinary the statement, the more that source matters. The trouble with the viral Bob Joyce claim is that the conclusion always seems to arrive before the source does. The audience sees the headline first, then the photographs, then the voice comparisons, then a handful of comments from other viewers, then another video repeating the same claim in slightly different words. By the time you've scrolled through all of that, the claim can start to feel like it's been confirmed independently, over and over. But repetition isn't independence. 10 articles can repeat one unsourced claim just as easily as one. A single video can get copied across 100 channels. A dramatic caption can be slapped over footage that has nothing to do with the claim at all. That's how a rumor becomes familiar enough to start feeling like fact. So the first task here isn't deciding whether the Bob Joyce theory itself is true. The first task is figuring out what has actually changed. And so far, the clearest change is simply this. Priscilla Presley's name has been pulled back into the story. The real Priscilla interview. There's one recent piece of the puzzle that deserves special attention, because unlike most of what's circulating, it comes from a source you can actually check. In 2025, People magazine published an interview with Priscilla Presley addressing the long-running rumors that Elvis might still be alive. Her answer matters because it's attributable, something real, on the record. In essence, she said she wished Elvis were still alive. That is a very different statement from the one now spreading online. It expresses longing.
He was very, very special in every way. Even today, he still has the amount of fans almost as when he was alive.
It doesn't confirm that he survived. It doesn't name Bob Joyce. And it doesn't hint at some secret second identity. That distinction is easy to lose once an audience already knows the Bob Joyce theory going in. When you're expecting a hidden message, ordinary statements can start to sound like coded ones. A phrase about the past becomes a clue. A wave of nostalgia becomes an admission. A comment about missing someone becomes evidence of a secret. But that's interpretation, not confirmation. Priscilla's genuine, recent public comments matter precisely because they give us something checkable. They let us compare what she has actually publicly said with what anonymous or sensational stories claim she said, and that comparison creates a real problem for the viral version of events. The attributable material we do have doesn't deliver the dramatic confirmation the headlines promise. It shows her speaking honestly about the emotional weight of losing Elvis and about the rumors that have followed his death for decades. That doesn't settle every question surrounding the Bob Joyce theory, but it does tell us something important about the specific claim in front of us. If someone insists Priscilla has now confirmed Bob Joyce as Elvis, the burden is on them to show exactly where she said it. The 2025 interview doesn't do that. So the investigation has to go one layer deeper. If the viral statement isn't in the obvious, recent interview, then where is it? Another interview somewhere? A private event? A social media post? An edited clip? Or did the internet simply take a general, emotional comment about Elvis and sharpen it into something far more specific than anything she actually said? That's the thread worth pulling. The real Elvis timeline. Before going any further into the Bob Joyce theory, it helps to anchor everything in the documented timeline, the part that isn't up for debate. Elvis Presley was born on January 8, 1935. He went on to become one of the most influential performers of the 20th century, building a career across music and film, serving in the United States Army and becoming, in the truest sense, a global cultural icon. Priscilla entered his life while he was stationed in Germany. They married in 1967. Lisa Marie was born in 1968. They separated in 1972, and their divorce was finalized in 1973. Elvis kept recording and touring after the divorce. According to Graceland's own timeline, his final concert took place on June 26, 1977, in Indianapolis. Then came August 16, 1977. Graceland's official record states that Elvis died that day at his Memphis home, at the age of 42. That's the documented historical framework. The Bob Joyce theory asks us to imagine something else entirely, that the public story of Elvis's death wasn't actually the end of his life, and that this alternate ending somehow connects to a pastor and musician living in Arkansas. For that to be true, an enormous chain of events would all have to be true as well. Elvis would have had to survive. His disappearance would have had to be concealed completely for decades. His identity would have had to be replaced or hidden. Bob Joyce's own documented personal history would have to be covering an entirely different one underneath. And everyone who might have known the truth would have had to stay silent or actively participate in the deception for close to 50 years. That's a lot to ask of the evidence. Big claims need strong support, and this is where viral stories often reverse the normal order of things. Instead of starting with evidence and following it to a conclusion, they start with the conclusion and go looking for similarities afterward. A familiar face becomes a clue. A familiar voice becomes a clue. A song becomes a clue. A phrase becomes a clue. And then an alleged Priscilla statement becomes the final piece holding it all together. But if that statement itself is unverified, the whole chain stays exactly what it's always been: speculation. Who Bob Joyce really is. Bob Joyce isn't some invented character dreamed up by the Elvis theory. He's a real pastor and musician connected to a household of Faith Church in Benton, Arkansas, and his official website is still actively publishing sermons and music services. That matters, because this story isn't built only on old photographs. There's recent material, too. His site's archive lists sermons and music services well into 2026, including recordings from February and May, along with a benefit concert in Cabot, Arkansas, in late May of that year. So anyone curious enough to investigate this for themselves can actually go watch current footage. That creates an unusual situation. This isn't the internet trying to track down a mysterious figure who vanished from view. It's discussing someone who continues to appear regularly in a public religious and musical setting, which makes the identity question even stranger in a way. People hear him sing. They compare his voice to Elvis's. They study his face, his mannerisms. And the old theory resurfaces right on cue. Joyce has addressed the rumor directly, more than once. Back in 2020, a YouTuber known online as the Spa Guy asked him point blank whether he was Elvis. Joyce said no. Older material shows him trying to gently discourage the rumor as well, which matters, because the current viral narrative often gives the impression he's never spoken on the subject at all. He has. That denial is part of the documented record, and it can't just be edited out of the story. There's another current detail that arguably matters even more. His official site has posted direct warnings about unauthorized accounts and misleading material circulating on social media. Back in February 2026, the site flagged fake Facebook and Telegram accounts and reminded people that any real, official ministry material only comes through verified, authorized channels. Stuck around for one main reason: it keeps getting fed fresh material. If it depended entirely on one grainy photo from years ago, interest probably would have faded by now. But Bob Joyce keeps performing. New photographs get taken. New footage gets recorded. Every new piece gives believers another chance to compare, and that turns the whole thing into a renewable source of curiosity. The audience doesn't need a historical discovery. It just needs a new clip. That warning should change how we treat some of the recent clips floating around. A video claiming to show Bob Joyce making some dramatic statement should be traced back to its actual source. A clip that looks like one of his performances should be checked against the official uploads. A voice recording shouldn't be assumed authentic just because the face on screen looks familiar. In this environment, authenticity itself has become part of the story. Why the theory never really went away. The Bob Joyce theory has stuck around for one main reason: it keeps getting fed fresh material. If it depended entirely on one grainy photo from years ago, interest probably would have faded by now. But Bob Joyce keeps performing. New photographs get taken. New footage gets recorded. Every new piece gives believers another chance to compare, and that turns the whole thing into a renewable source of curiosity. The audience doesn't need a historical discovery. It just needs a new clip. Then there's the sheer pull of Elvis himself. He isn't remembered the way an ordinary entertainer is remembered. His image became part of American cultural mythology. For a lot of people, his music is tangled up with childhood, with parents and grandparents, old records, old television specials. That emotional weight is exactly what makes a familiar voice feel unusually powerful. If someone hears a singer and immediately thinks, "That sounds like Elvis," the reaction can be sincere and immediate. The same goes for a face. Someone who's studied Elvis photographs for years might genuinely recognize a familiar expression in someone else. But recognition isn't the same thing as identification. The human brain is simply built to hunt for patterns. Once someone expects a connection, similarities get easier to spot, and differences get easier to explain away. That's part of why theories like this survive even direct denials. A believer can interpret the denial as part of the cover story itself. A difference in age gets explained away. A gap in biography gets explained away. The absence of documentary evidence becomes, to some, evidence of secrecy. At that point, the theory becomes almost impossible to disprove, not because it's strong, but because it stopped making any prediction that could actually be tested. And now Priscilla's name has been pulled into that same cycle. A famous person who genuinely knew Elvis gets attached to the story, and suddenly every old similarity feels newly significant. The photographs feel more important. The voice comparisons feel more important. Even the old denials start to feel, to some viewers, more suspicious than before. The whole theory gets another burst of oxygen. The real question is whether that new attention comes from new evidence, or just from a new coat of paint. The insider effect. There's a specific kind of psychological pull that happens when a theory suddenly gains an insider. The audience feels instantly closer to the secret. In this case, Priscilla is close to the perfect insider for a story like this, because her real connection to Elvis is beyond dispute. She knew him personally. She lived with him. She raised their daughter. She stayed connected to him after the divorce, and later took on a real role managing the Presley family's legacy. So when a headline claims Priscilla has finally revealed something, the audience doesn't hear it as coming from some random commentator. They hear it as coming from someone who could, in theory, actually know. That distinction is exactly why the underlying source needs to be checked so carefully. The fact that someone could plausibly know something doesn't prove they said it. And the internet skips that step constantly. A celebrity's real relationship becomes a stand-in for an actual source. The headline says Priscilla, and the audience quietly supplies the credibility on its own. That's what makes this particular story so interesting from a media standpoint. The Priscilla angle probably isn't powerful because it produced new evidence. It's powerful because it changed how people perceive the old evidence that was already sitting there. That's a very different phenomenon. Picture a viewer who already believes Bob Joyce resembles Elvis. Then they see a headline claiming Priscilla has confirmed the theory. They go back and rewatch one of his performances, and suddenly the voice sounds even closer to Elvis than it did before. They look at a photograph again, and the resemblance feels stronger than it did last week. The alleged Priscilla statement has quietly changed how the older material gets interpreted, even though the material itself hasn't changed one bit. The evidence didn't get stronger. The framing did. That's really why this video is built around the question of why her name is back, rather than any claim that she's confirmed something. It gives us a reason to investigate the mechanism instead of just swallowing the conclusion whole. The famous quote problem. One of the biggest issues with this whole story is how quotations travel once they hit the internet. A sentence sitting inside quotation marks looks authoritative. It looks precise, like it was recorded somewhere, word for word. But quotation marks on a random web page aren't a primary source. They're just formatting. The alleged Priscilla quote linking Bob Joyce to Elvis has spread in exactly this way. Different pages phrase it slightly differently. Some call it a confession. Some call it an exposure. Some claim she finally broke her silence. Others simply ask, in a headline, whether she's revealed the truth. The language gets more dramatic with every retelling, but the core question never changes. Where's the original? If there's a recording, where's the full version of it? If there's an interview, where's the complete transcript? If there's a written statement, where was it actually published? If this supposedly happened at some event, when was it and who recorded it? Without answers to those questions, the quote stays exactly what it is, an allegation. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be discussed. It means it should be described honestly. There's a real difference between saying Priscilla Presley said Bob Joyce is Elvis and saying a viral claim insists that Priscilla Presley said Bob Joyce is Elvis. The first is a factual assertion. The second describes an internet phenomenon. They carry completely different burdens of proof, and right now the evidence only supports the second sentence. Once you adopt that more careful wording, the whole investigation actually gets more interesting, not less. Now we can ask why the claim spread the way it did. We can look at the videos repeating it, examine the timing, compare the alleged quote against what Priscilla has actually, verifiably said. We can check whether the same original source keeps showing up under a dozen different headlines and ask whether any legitimate outlet has ever authenticated it. And we can show the audience, clearly, exactly where the trail of evidence runs out. The social media loop. The modern Elvis mystery exists entirely inside a recommendation system, and that changes everything about how it spreads. Decades ago, a rumor like this might show up in a tabloid and then quietly disappear. Today, a single video can keep circulating for years. Someone watches it, another video gets recommended. They click, a new creator notices the engagement, and another video appears. Before long, the same underlying claim exists in 100 different forms. One version says Bob Joyce is Elvis. Another says he finally confessed. Another says Priscilla exposed him. Another lines up side-by-side photos. Another claims some new performance contains a hidden clue. The wording keeps shifting. The material underneath often doesn't. That's exactly why this 2026 Priscilla wave deserves a careful look. The sheer number of creators talking about it proves interest, nothing more. It doesn't prove independent verification. Recommendation systems are built to surface whatever grabs attention, not to fact-check history. A sensational title will almost always outperform a cautious one, even when the cautious one is closer to the truth, and that creates a constant pressure to ratchet up the certainty in the wording. Priscilla discusses Elvis becomes Priscilla breaks her silence. Online users speculate about Bob Joyce becomes new evidence shocks fans. An alleged quote is circulating becomes Priscilla confirms the truth. Each version is more clickable than the last, and each version drifts a little further from whatever the source actually said, if there even was one. That's why a serious look at this has to run the process in reverse. Start with the headline, trace it back to the underlying claim, find the earliest version you can locate, check the date, check the context, then compare it against independent sources. If the claim survives all of that, it comes out stronger. If it doesn't, at least the audience knows exactly where it fell apart. That's the kind of story that stays genuinely compelling without needing to manufacture certainty it doesn't have. The mystery lives in the gap between what the headline promises and what the source can actually show. The 2026 Bob Joyce footage. There's a real reason the Bob Joyce theory has stayed visually active this year. His ministry keeps producing new material. That's genuinely different from a lot of old celebrity mysteries, where the central figure is long gone and there's nothing new left to look at. Bob Joyce is still performing, still appearing on camera, and that gives both sides a